I'd love to open it up to Q&A. If any of you all have, I mean, we already had a question from the audience, and we also have a comment in the chat, which I'll just read. So in Italy, what matters is not the type of infrastructure, but the legal entity. If you build and operate a monorail within a municipality, the rule that applies is a sort of Chapter 9, while if you build and operate a monorail within a subsidiary, the rule is a sort of Chapter 11. The only possibility is that the municipality may decide to help its subsidiary, and in that case, it may get in trouble, ending in a Chapter 9, while the subsidiary would remain safe. And so that's, I think, a different perspective from the U.S. And then we got, go ahead.
I mean, again, one of the things I should also say about Chapter 9 versus Chapter 11, some other differences. Chapter 9 is what we would call very debtor friendly, in the sense that the only remedy a creditor has is to dismiss the case. In a regular Chapter 11, for example, the creditors can say, hey, this reorganization isn't going to happen, isn't viable. Let's liquidate. Let's file a liquidation, what we would call a Chapter 7. You can't do that with a municipality. The only if there is no plan, the only remedy is to dismiss the case. Also, in a Chapter 11, because there is all the properties, I said, goes to something we call property of the estate. There's intense supervision by the court over out of the ordinary course transactions that the debtor may involve. In Chapter 9, there is no property of the estate. The estate does not come under, the property does not come under the jurisdiction of the federal bankruptcy court. And the city does not have to come to the bankruptcy court, for example, to engage in its normal operations. It can still continue to tax. It can still continue to serve its citizens. And I mean, although the technical structure for those interested is that Chapter 9 starts out with an extremely long and complicated section that says all of the following provisions and only the following provisions are from Chapter 11 apply. And so you kind of take a look and see what kind of carries over and what doesn't. And again, no property of the estate, no ability to convert to a liquidation. And kind of broad oversight gone are again hallmarks of the idea that we're still dealing with something that was created by a sovereign state, kind of the United States.
Absolutely. So another question we got, can you perhaps say something more about the role of public financing as a factor in identifying a municipality, the role that the level and modality of public funding play in such determinations?
Sure, you got about 10 hours. We can go into that. I mean, generally, and again, this is at like what we would say is a 50,000 foot or 50,000 meter look at the ground. There are two types of revenue that a municipality can create. One, or finance, if you will. If they want to borrow money, they can issue bonds that are general revenue bonds. And these are bonds that are backed by the general tax collections of the issuing entity. So when I buy, for example, a bond from the state of Illinois, it's backed by all the tax revenues of the state of Illinois. There may be significant restrictions about realizing upon that tax revenue, but that's what it's backed by. The second thing, and the thing that I started out talking about, are these special revenue bonds, where a municipality will finance a particular project. It's not unlike project finance. Would finance this type of project by borrowing money from the public, issuing bonds that have the tax-free attribute, and then making those bonds non-recourse to the general revenues, but backing it with a collateral in terms of the developer loan agreement. And people far smarter than me figure out what the best blend of those types of arrangements are for a particular city. And I should also mention one of the things that's happened with respect to Chapter 9 is where I started out, which is a Chapter 9 plan gets to, if it's confirmed, applies to everybody, even those who voted against it. And it's the same voting requirements as in a Chapter 11, majority in number and at least two-thirds in amount. And that's become important in Detroit and San Bernardino and Vallejo and a number of other countries because cities and counties and other municipalities of the kind of general nature we would think of have become over indebted with respect to both pension funds or pension obligations and obligations to their public service employees, the fire protection, the police, and the like. And for example, in Detroit, the only way that Detroit got out of Chapter 9 was what they called a grand compromise, in which the state contributed some money and the unions, the police unions, the firefighter unions, and the pensions agreed to restructure their debt. And that was the subject of a lot of mediations and a lot of negotiations because everyone realized that if you didn't do it, the only thing the federal court could do would be dismiss the case and let them go try and figure it out somewhere else. So, the question was about public finance. The issue is that the general revenue bonds are insufficient to pay a lot of the debts that the municipalities have, as some might say, improvidently run up in terms of the pensions, in terms of what they have paid to various unions and the like. And from people I know who do this kind of work generally, Chapter 9 is one of the things I should also say about Chapter 9 in terms of eligibility. Not only do you have to be a municipality, not only do you have to have the permission of the state like California or Illinois, but you have to be insolvent, which is unlike Chapter 11. Chapter 11 does not have an insolvency requirement. You have to be insolvent in the sense what we would call equitable insolvent, unable to pay your debts as they become due. And you have to have shown that you've at least tried to work this out before you file. So there are some very significant, some would say impediments, others would say necessary requirements to file that don't exist for Chapter 11 debtors generally. So again, you asked me for the time and I built you a watch, but I think that's kind of the notion of kind of public financing.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So I think we have time for one more question, which is, in your introduction, you pointed at the limited number of Chapter 9 cases and limitations to get into a Chapter 9 case. What in practice is the common alternative that is used?
There is no common alternative because each state gets to have its own laws with respect to how it deals with it. Some states, and so there's a multiplicity of ways. Some states, for example, have financial responsibility boards, a different agency, which will have power to kind of take over a city or a county and run their finances. And a state has the power to do that with its municipalities because these are creatures, if you will, that it had the power to create. The federal government did not. What they can't do, and the reason, as I said, Chapter 9 exists, is the state taking over Detroit. Michigan taking over Detroit would not have worked very well because they couldn't adjust the pensions. They couldn't adjust the union contracts. Same thing in San Bernardino and Vallejo. That the real financial problems there were what some would say improvident contracts. Others would say contracts they couldn't pay. And so without the ability to impose a majority-driven solution, because that's all bankruptcy in one sense is the state's power to compel dissenters to accept a plan. Given that power to municipalities, that's what they needed in those cases.
Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. Oh, and we just have one more comment. So in Japan, if a monorail is operated by a municipal transportation bureau, the Local Government Fiscal Consolidation Act applies and it will not go bankrupt. However, if the monorail is a private company in which the city also invests, it can go bankrupt. In such cases, it is normal for the city to compensate creditors for losses, and often the city's illegal expenditures are challenged by taxpayer suits. For example, a monorail built entirely by the private sector, such as the monorail connecting Haneda Airport in Tokyo, could of course go bankrupt. So again, another perspective here.
Well, yeah, I guess if one wanted to, because law professors always try and do this, to draw a general thread out of this,
Yeah.
right, is that you get the bankruptcy system that meets the bankruptcy system in one sense is subsidiary to the system that's in place. I mean, Chapter 9 responds to the ways in which U.S. Local government entities finance themselves. I suspect that's not the same as other places finance their entities. And again, remember the monorail started not as just as the connection between two hotels, and it was expanded. Some would say that politically it shouldn't have happened, but it did. And when in fact people aren't getting paid, it doesn't do any good to say, well, you shouldn't have done it in the first instance.
Absolutely. So I think that's a great place to end our conversation. I want to thank Professor Markell so much for joining us today and for sharing your perspective and sharing your knowledge on these issues.